paralegals who are looking to move into legal operations. We're going to talk about exactly that topic, how you can transition from being a paralegal, whether you're working in a law firm, working in a corporate legal department, into a legal operations role. I'll give a quick intro to myself before allowing the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll sort of get right into it. As Colin said, I'm Kevin Cohn. I'm Brightflag's Chief Customer Officer. Brightflag is a legal spend e-billing and matter management system. And I decided today to have a real background where I blend into it. So, if I fade in and out, that's why. It's because I don't have a good sense of style. And so I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves. And Greta, go first.
Great. Hi, I'm Greta Hall, and I am the Legal Operations Manager at Home Depot. I've been in legal for over 20 years in various roles, various capacities, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Greta. Allison.
Allison English. I'm Senior Manager of Legal Operations at Ream Manufacturing. I've been with Ream almost 8 years and have been in the legal field for over 20 years in various roles similar to Greta.
Caitlin.
Hi, Caitlin. I'm with Zoom. I have been with Zoom for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I was a paralegal for over a decade and wearing all kinds of hats in law firms.
Awesome. So the idea for this session actually arose from a post that I made on LinkedIn a number of months ago. A customer of Brightflag's general counsel had asked me, we're having our budgets being cut, and we really want to originate a legal operations function, but sort of not sure how to go about doing it, not sure how to find the person, how to nurture them along, and how to define the responsibilities. And I'm going to greatly abbreviate the post, but I said, hey, do you have a superstar paralegal that is operationally minded? And he said, yeah, she's my right hand. And I said, that's your future legal operations manager. And the post kind of took off because, of course, anything related to professional development and moving from sort of one career function into another, you're necessarily going to simplify and lose some of the nuance. But some of the topics that came up in the comments that followed that post were around how you can transition someone from a paralegal job into a legal operations role while not overtaxing them or the organization. Compensation was a topic that came up quite a bit. How do you make sure that as you're taking on more responsibility, you're also being rewarded through more compensation? And a really important theme was, what are the differences between paralegal roles and legal operations roles? And there was general agreement that there are quite a few transferable skills, but there was less clarity around just what is the difference. If you just change someone's title, are they instantaneously in legal operations? Or are there additional skills, experiences, ways of working that also need to evolve and change and be learned so that you can make that transition, fully and successfully? So these are some of the topics that we're going to explore today. As Colin said, please do ask questions in the chat as we go. And we're going to dive in with a sort of broad, open-ended question to try and get a good base of understanding here. Paralegal roles, they can cover many different areas of responsibility. And I'd love to hear from each of you what were your areas of responsibility when you were a paralegal? And Caitlin, I might go to you first with this question.
Sure. So throughout my paralegal career, I started actually as a family law paralegal. Then I moved into litigation and then intellectual property, and then I moved in-house, and that's where I started focusing on corporate paralegal work. So I've been all over the place. All of the, looking back to my transition into legal operations, all of those, even though they were specific areas of law, have really transferred into legal operations because I'm able to draw on those experiences and say, oh yeah, I used to do that back when I was a family law attorney, paralegal, working for family law attorneys. and we had to streamline this process for client intake. And so just taken that and kind of transferred it along the career path and into the opportunity.
I'm sorry, Caitlin, you broke up in the last sort of 5 seconds there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying, all of those things that I learned, in those various paralegal roles, just really helped transfer me into where I'm at now, because I'm able to draw back on those experiences and say, I used to do this. How can I relate it to my now?
Great. I'd like to go, Allison, to you to hear how your experience as a paralegal might have been similar or different. But maybe before you dive in, if I could ask the presenters to go on mute when they are not speaking, and we're going to try to squash the background noise that we saw earlier. But Allison, over to you.
All right. Yeah. So I started out as an employment paralegal, and that was pretty much where I stayed. I did in litigation, employment litigation, but during the time that I was a paralegal, I had the opportunity to be sort of in startup firms. So there was a lot of that process implementation, from implementing technologies to designing processes around conflict checking for law firms. So I took everything from just setting up those processes, from doing the traditional kind of paralegal work where you're working on discovery and completing tasks and just sort of getting the job done, into my operations role. I mean, it was sort of organic for me. I feel like most of the things I did, I use every day now in various forms. It was just a different way, and maybe it's less task oriented and more strategic at this point. But being that employment paralegal, also having that in that role, I had a lot of engagement with our clients. So I use that in sort of my people management skills, and there's sort of those soft skills that that I use on a regular basis, that I was very engaged in with my lawyers, and change management, and how are we going to make things better, how are we going to make things different for our clients and also for our other lawyers and paralegals. So those were skills I was using regularly while I was a paralegal that I've transferred over.
That sounds right. One point in particular that you made there, we're going to come back to, which is, this sort of transition from tasks, so doing daily work, to not higher level thinking necessarily, or not higher level thinking only, but being a force multiplier, right? So the task that you're doing actually impacting many people's abilities to get tasks done. Greta, so a slightly different question for you, sort of getting into this transition, right? So what I've heard from Caitlin and Allison, and I'm sure if I asked you the same question, you would just add to it, many different things that paralegals are doing. Talk about your transition. Who gave you the opportunity initially to transition from paralegal into legal ops, and how did that opportunity come up?
That's a good question. So my last paralegal job, I was actually working at a small medical malpractice law firm. And as a paralegal, I was also, as you know, paralegal, that's just a title to everything, all things legal, right? So I was doing office manager type work, in addition to, of course, administrative things and the paralegal work / legal administrator, everything. So all of those skills kind of helped me kind of get in-house. So once I left the law firm, I went in-house to Intercontinental Hotels Group, not necessarily as a legal operations person, but as a legal administrator. And so they didn't have a legal operations department. And those skills that I had, got from there, making sure that processes were in place and procedures and creating efficiencies, that transferred into my position now at Home Depot. And so really, I think if you have legal experience, when you get into legal operations, all of that experience really just transfers right over. And it's probably less busy work, but more creating processes for a group of people that you're used to working with, which is attorneys. And so that's where I got started, actually, was working in law firms, got in-house, and that took me to where I am now at Home Depot.
And so what was the tipping point, if you will? Did someone come up to you and say, "Hey, we need to"? I've heard of this thing. Legal. I'm putting words in someone's mouth here. I've heard of this thing, operations, and I think you'd be great for it. Or did you, when you moved from Intercontinental Hotels Group to the Home Depot, you were applying for a legal operations role? How exactly did that transition happen?
Yes. So while I was at Intercontinental, as a legal administrator, I brought to them once I found out about legal operations, because that this is kind of a wildfire that has kind of taken on and is spreading, right? So before going to Intercontinental, I didn't know about legal operations. And so once I really started hearing more about it, I felt like I'm already doing this, we need this here. And of course, that was right before the pandemic hit. And, in the hotel industry, that really hit hard. And so when the position for legal operations came open with Home Depot, I read the job description and I'm like, wow, this is everything I've done. I'm going to apply. And so when I did and they called me, I was really just kind of excited about it because I knew that I could get in and make a difference using all of that experience that I had as a paralegal. And sure enough, as I've gotten in here and started working, I'm using all those transferable skills to really build this position because this was a new position, the legal operations manager one was. And so I'm actually making it into, into that, to what I want it to be, because I'm not taking over someone else's position. It's one that I'm creating as I'm going along.
Great. I think we'll come, I'm going to maybe have a follow-up question a bit later on about how you crafted your resume and your application to resonate with the hiring manager. Allison, I know you had a different move because you originated the legal ops function at Ream. Tell us a little bit about how that came to pass.
Right. So yes, that's correct. And well, I'll step back a little bit. I was in paralegal roles and I had an opportunity at one of the firms to start taking on more business kind of operational tasks and getting involved in some of the business side. And I knew that I wanted to transition more to the business side of law. I didn't exactly know what that meant. And there wasn't really legal operations roles that were like, oh, this is it, So I started looking at other roles in executive assisting that allowed me to sort of learn the financial management piece at other companies. And I had built on that skill set in the finance management and added into some of the business skills of onboarding, HR type work. And the role at Ream came up, and that was an executive assistant role. But in talking to the CLO and understanding sort of the job scope, I knew that it was transitioning to be more of that role I was looking for. It wasn't called legal operations, but what I will say is that very quickly thereafter, I think within a year, I was able to say, look, I'm an operator, and brought it to the table. And he said, yeah, you're right. You're an operator. He knew what legal operations was sort of on the forefront, and he agreed. So that's sort of how the role transitioned for me.
Got it. Now, I want to, that all makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I know is a hot button in the industry right now, and this is not specific to paralegals or to legal operations, but to legal generally, is legal versus the business. And so I want to suggest a reframing and maybe get all of your feedback on this. To me, it seems paralegals, a lot of the work tends to be on matters, on cases, right? Whereas legal operations, there are occasions where you might dip in and assist in vendor selection or invoice management or something related to a particular matter. But usually the work is sort of above the matter level, if you will. Does that sort of distinction resonate with the group? What might I be missing?
For me, that totally resonates. I do think, you are working on the matter level, but then when you switch to more that operational side, you're working to help the business and sort of be strategic. At least in my role, I'm constantly looking at ways to sort of drive efficiencies and drive a partnership between legal and our business units. That's our internal client. So it's definitely different. It's not matter level work. It is operational business level work.
So Bill, Sorry, Caitlin, go ahead.
No, I was just, everything that Allison said is spot on. In my experience, I found the same thing. So, yeah.
So here's my question for you, Caitlin. You went from being a paralegal to now being in legal ops, and you went through that sort of transition from working on matters and supporting attorneys to still supporting attorneys and also supporting the business, but just in a different way. What surprised you about that? And do you sometimes miss working on matters?
Uh, yeah, that's a great question. So, I think that, as Greta and Allison have already touched on, as a paralegal, you kind of get called on to do a lot of these things. And I think what surprised me the most so I kind of have a unique transition story in that I started at Zoom as a corporate paralegal. We did not have an operations function. And then when our new general counsel came on, he said, I really want to create a legal operations function. And I had the opportunity to I interviewed and hired my boss. So I then, she was part of the company for about a year, and then she had an opening on her team, and she reached out to me and said, I think you'd be great for this. And what she really helped me understand and realize was that all of the things I had been doing, not all of the things, but a lot of the things that I had been doing as a paralegal were actually legal operations functions. And I had this transition period where I was still working on matters with our corporate legal team, but also getting the exposure into legal operations before I made the full title switch. And sometimes I do miss, getting in the weeds of the matters. But I really think that for me, having that big picture, helping our attorneys work more efficiently and doing all of those things, like that's where I'm meant to be, and that's where I want to be. And so, if you're a paralegal listening to this, or you're a GC listening to this, and you're going, gosh, I have this paralegal and he is, working on these things, and they're creating processes, and they've created this great streamlined thing here, look at them. Maybe they do want to get out of that paralegal role and move into operations.
Wow, there's so many great points that you just made that we could follow up on. One, just before it escapes my mind, you said she or he. Obviously, paralegals can be of any gender, as can legal operations professionals. Both happen to skew very heavily in the female direction. So the fact that we have a panel of women here is not an accident. It's super important. And, Colin and I partnered to do a legal operations compensation survey earlier this year. And one of the things that we identified in that survey was that, according to the data, we had over 200 respondents from in-house legal operations professionals. Women, when controlling for the size of legal team and the years of experience, are being underpaid in almost every dimension as compared with their non-female counterparts. And so, that's a super important topic as we sort of continue on in this conversation and think about transitioning. We need to make sure that we have the right representation at all levels and from all genders. Caitlin, as you were talking about how sometimes you still miss, working on the matters and getting into the details, Greta, I think I might have seen a small smile on your face there. So, what do you have to say about this? Do you sometimes miss partnering with the attorneys on the legal?
No.
No. Why not?
It's, believe it or not, to me, legal operations is less stressful. Yes, it seems like it's, a bigger responsibility because you are really trying to give the attorneys the opportunity to do attorney work. And so you're taking on the whole operations of the legal department. But when I was a paralegal, I don't know about anybody else, but I was stressing when it came time for trial, and I had, making sure exhibits were together. It was just very stressful. And then again, like I said, I was taking on so many different other roles within that paralegal role. Paralegal was my title, but if I thought about it, it was legal admin slash paralegal slash billings. It was several things in one. Now, I will not change any of that because it did give me the experience that I have, to do this position that I'm in now. So I wouldn't change it, but I don't think I would go back to it.
So the reason I followed up on it is, you and Caitlin are sort of articulating what I think is a really important difference here. We started this conversation by saying, hey, paralegals cover a wide range of job responsibilities. Also, there are a wide range of personalities that are in paralegal roles, and some of them, like the three of you, want to be more operationally minded, want to focus on automation and on driving business results in a particular way. There are certainly other paralegals that absolutely love getting into the details of the matters and are more comfortable there, and their skills are probably a better fit there. I don't think that one is more valuable or more valid than the other. I think that they're two equally important roles. And if I were a paralegal thinking about what my next career move is going to be, is legal ops right for me? What I'm getting from the three of you, and you've all been through this transition successfully, is it takes a certain mindset. That mindset is not necessarily for everyone. Like Greta, I know some people who absolutely thrive on the thing that you're saying gave you a lot of stress, right? So different people are going to react to these things in different ways. And as you think about your career development, I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. So Caitlin, you said you were sort of doing double duty. You were slowly starting to transition off of some matter-related work, take on more, cross-matter work, if you will, before the title change happened and it went fully across. Tell us more about that process. How long was that transition? What were some of the challenges that arose from it?
Some days I still think I am in that transition process because, I have business clients that will still reach out because they knew me as the paralegal. And so it's, they know that I was the source to go to for this question. Some days I still feel like I'm in that transition. But I just want to add, as you're making this transition, even if you are pulling double duty, I think it's really important to always have that conversation and advocate for yourself and say, I really want to move into legal operations. I'm okay taking on and like having this transition, but just keep that conversation going so that you don't get sucked into this burnout of doing both, because they are both challenging jobs and, very different jobs. And so that's my, something take away. If you're looking at this, if you're in a smaller firm or smaller in-house department and they're asking you to do both, just make sure you're having that conversation to say, this is operations, this is paralegal work, and let's continue this conversation so that I can move into one or the other bucket. I think that's important.
Yeah, agreed. Allison, how about your experience? How does it align or differ from what Caitlin just described?
I'm totally aligned with Caitlin. I think when you have a role that transitions, there's always, I feel like in some ways I am still like, there's still things that hang on there that you're moving from, but it's an evolution and you just have to keep advocating for yourself. And also I think that the legal ops role lends itself. You're going to start taking on more projects and adding tangible value where you're sort of your skill set and the value you add changes a bit. And so, usually having those conversations and advocating and talking to your boss about where is your time best spent, that's sort of how things move along. right? So I would definitely agree. It's a process, and it's not a straight cut. Okay, now I'm doing this, and I was doing this.
Yeah. So we've got a question from the audience here, and Greta, I think that you might be a great person to give a first response to this because of the journey that you've gone through. So Jonathan asked here, would you recommend for a litigation paralegal currently at a law firm to move in-house before transitioning into legal ops? Because in this person's experience, paralegals are in the weeds a lot of the time, and law firms would rather have their resources be billable.
I mean, personally, I think it would be good to move in-house. You know, it's totally different. When I went from working in a law firm to in-house, I was really surprised at just how, I would say, a little bit more laid back it was compared to law firms that, you know, even regardless of how big or small they are, it seems kind of chaotic when depending on the workload that you have. And so, yeah, I would recommend going in-house. I do know that some law firms are starting to start legal operations departments as well. But yeah, I would definitely recommend if your career path is to get into legal operations, I think going in-house is probably the next step to making that transition.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, supply, buy side and sell side, in-house versus outside counsel, very different. I think legal operations is one area in which corporate legal departments are outpacing outside counsel by a pretty significant degree. But I expect that gap will close because legal operations is increasingly everywhere now. We've got another question from the audience here, from someone that I know well. What has been the most rewarding part of transitioning to legal operations? Caitlin, the most rewarding. And it's interesting because you and Allison have had the opportunity of seeing both roles at the same company. So I'd be interested in hearing it specifically within the one organization. How has it changed your job satisfaction and the way that you view your contributions to the company?
Yeah, I think for me, the most rewarding thing is just that, I'm getting greater exposure to not only our department, but our entire company. And, getting the opportunity to have a seat at the table for conversations that I would have never been a part of as a paralegal. And so that's been just a really neat and cool journey that I've gotten to go on as being a legal operations professional now.
Yeah. And Allison, one thing that you highlighted in particular in an earlier answer was financial management. I feel very strongly, I mentioned at the start, what Brightflag does is legal spend management and matter management software. So on the one hand, you might say, of course I would say this. And on the other hand, I would say, well, yeah, duh. The language of business is money, is finance. And so the closer that you can get to being able to impact the financial statements and to be able to contribute to their improvement, I think ultimately the more value that you can create, the more awareness you have of what's going on in the business. Tell us more about your experience starting to get into that, Allison or Reem.
So at my role just before Reem, I had started to manage sort of the corporate budget and learning, getting ready for the board and presenting financials to the board. And when I went to Reem, they were just sort of implementing their budgeting process. And I took it on and basically developed it with our CLO for legal. And that included implementing just financial controls across the board from outside counsel management to implementing e-billing, and then I fully run the budget. And that's basically, I know the ins and outs of everything we're spending globally with our outside counsel, and that has been a great transition for me because I've been doing it so long now. I have a seat at the table with our finance teams, and I'm talking to the business unit leaders about what they can expect to spend and why they can expect to spend it, and then I'm helping be strategic and think, okay, how can we save money with outside counsel by running RFPs and alternative fee arrangements? And so through working in the finance and getting that complete kind of immersion in that at Ream and from the ground up has been instrumental in my development and sort of my place on the leadership team. Most of the time I'm presenting on our operations, but a lot of times everybody's asking me about where's the money going and what's coming up next. So that's been huge.
And this sort of reminds me that there was probably another leveling question that we could have asked, which is, we talked about at the start, paralegals cover many different areas of responsibility. The same is true of legal ops professionals. Just because your title is legal operations manager or director of legal ops or whatever it happens to be, doesn't mean that you are doing the same tasks as another person with the same title at the same company or at a different company. So maybe just each of us can talk about what are the sort of 3 core areas of focus for you today. Greta, I'd love to start with you.
Yes. So my core area is reporting. That is huge. Reporting on our legal department metrics. We do that quarterly. So that's a big one for me right now. Another one that's really big is system managing the systems. Our spend and matter management systems. That's at the top of my list right now because we're looking to change systems soon. Efficiency is definitely something that I've been working on because when you come into an existing law firm or an existing legal department, everyone has their way of doing things, and so I believe that in creating the legal operations department within Home Depot, they were really looking for someone that could come in and, put together processes that would make things run a lot smoother, where they can see their value in having a legal operations department. It's not, I think a lot of people confuse legal operations with office management, like, oh, you guys are just office managers. But no, it's a whole lot more to it than that. And so that's been my core thing, is really changing their mindset on what it is that the value we're bringing to them and really gaining their trust in us as legal operators to create efficiencies, find systems that'll help them focus more on their work as attorneys and let us take on all of the other things to make, the processes run a lot smoother.
Yeah. Caitlin, what do you think?
The number one thing that I work on every single day is our outside counsel spend, our law firm engagement. I administer our e-billing tool. So like Allison, I'm meeting with our financial operations team to making sure our systems are syncing, our FP&A partners. In this role, I had the opportunity to streamline our approval process for outside counsel. And so that is now, thankfully, something that is completely automated, and I don't have to think about it until I go into our approval meeting with FP&A. I no longer have to send manual reminders to our law firm. So that's a big win for our team. And then the other things that I'm working on right now are just, Zoom went through rapid growth. And so all of the processes and things that our department did that are stuck in people's heads, I'm helping kind of knowledge share that and say, what's your process? Let's document it. Let's streamline how this information is shared out to our team and our department. And then we're just working on, also creating like an intranet site for not only our department, but our business users and how they can connect with us and who they should connect with. And so just more of that knowledge sharing.
It's interesting. Well, not surprising because I invited the panelists, but obviously, Greta, Caitlin, and Allison have all talked about the importance of legal operations when it comes to engaging with outside counsel, understanding all of the metrics and reporting associated with that, financial discipline, partnering with accounts payable and with FP&A. I do want to highlight that there are other things that legal operations professionals might be focused on. And so if you're a paralegal right now, going down the track of legal operations that's highly focused on outside counsel engagement, fantastic opportunity. That tends to be where most legal operations professionals start and where most legal operations teams start. But there are also legal operations professionals that focus, for example, on contract management. So if you're a commercial contracts paralegal right now, and you spend a lot of time sort of manually moving contracts through the workflow, and the clause library exists, but it's in your head, and you're the one who gets everyone to sign off on signing a contract. You might realize it, you might not realize it, but you are already thinking like a legal operations professional, and there's an entire path there for you to, as sort of Greta alluded to, be the system administrator on a contract lifecycle management system to help design what are the ways to eliminate all of those bottlenecks and get to a better place. So many different options here. There are a few questions from the audience that I'd love to cycle back to here. And one of them, we knew when we did a prep session, and we knew that this question was going to come up. And so here it is. And we agreed, of course, compensation is a personal thing, right? And also, I very much care that all of our panelists remain in the good graces of their current and former employers. So we're going to answer this question sort of conceptually and at a high level. But the question is, how do you find that the compensation differs between your paralegal roles and your legal ops roles? Higher, better? What are the other advantages, from a comp and benefits perspective? And this one, I'm just going to make a jump ball. Who wants to who wants to dive in on this one first?
I will. I will say, money is always the issue when you're changing positions, right? It's like, am I going to make more money doing more work? Or, I will tell you that when I look back on my compensation in the law firm sector versus in-house as a legal operations manager, and maybe just legal operations, the salary is commensurate to this position. I will say that I am making more money in this position. And one thing I wanted when I felt capped out as a paralegal, I was like, well, I don't want to go to law school. So, what's my next option? So I did feel a little stagnant as a paralegal. And so was really excited that legal operations kind of came along. And, but yes, I think that the salary and it does kind of depend on the company, but I will say that it's great salary. It's good. It's worth the extra work that you're doing to create all of these processes and efficiencies. It's definitely worth it.
Now, Allison, when you introduced yourself as the senior manager of legal operations, and you left out, because you weren't bragging, so I'm going to do it for you, that you were just promoted into that position. So obviously you've seen a lot of success and growth in your career. Rather than maybe focus on the specifics of the comp, can you talk about how you have thought about compensation growth throughout your career, and what some of the things are from a communication and sort of framing perspective that you have found to be effective?
Sure. And, on Greta's point, like as you're transitioning, from a type of career, a different kind of title or whatnot, it can be different. And it's, I think in any role, you're your own advocate, right? So when I look at what tasks I am doing, and in legal operations, I have the opportunity to be able to show real metrics of savings that's tangible to the business, that it's, you can't argue with it. And so that is sort of how I frame out when I'm looking at my role and what I'm doing and the value that I'm adding, Not to say that in my paralegal role, I understand that I was adding a tremendous value, but I did feel to a certain degree, I did cap out at some point. And so the ability to transition into an operational role where I can show the value to the business in a numerical way by managing the finances and cost savings and driving those efficiencies, it's a little easier to do in the operational role. So that's kind of how I would give my feedback on the difference and kind of how to look at the two roles.
Yeah, I would also say, and Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you in a second, but all three of you are working at growth businesses. And I think that's a super important thing. It doesn't matter what role you are in or what role you are looking to move into. If you want to grow your earnings and your earnings potential, make sure you're working for a growth business, right? Because growth, business growth fuels compensation growth. Caitlin, what would you add to this conversation about compensation?
Yeah, I think I would just add, and Kevin, you actually touched on this with your compensation survey, is that legal operations isn't benchmarked to legal operations. And so, to Allison's point, when you're going and advocating for yourself to get that higher pay or this title, go pull up the compensation survey, make the argument for I should be benchmarked against sales ops or, whatever else if your company is not benchmarking you appropriately. That's all I'd have to add to that. I think there's a lot of growth that still needs to happen in this role and in this.
Yeah, I think, and I just dropped the link to the compensation survey that we've been talking about in the chat. The challenge that Caitlin is alluding to is that as you get into larger companies, they tend to establish job families and job ladders. And what many legal operations professionals find is that they are getting benchmarked against a paralegal job family because the legal operations profession is still very new. It's growing extremely quickly, but it's still very new. And so as you are moving from a paralegal to legal ops role and you're going to have the compensation conversation, my advice to you would be twofold. Number one, come prepared with the legal ops comp survey, link in the chat. And number two, front burner the issue, right? I guarantee you, all three of the people on this webinar can guarantee you that HR will pull open the book and say, paralegal job family. So tell them that that's what they're thinking before they come back to you and say, this is what's going on, right? And help to educate them on the differences. And there are differences, and we've talked about the differences throughout this webinar. But this is a super important point because, I personally am not a big fan of negotiation. And by that, I don't mean don't fight for what you're worth. You absolutely should. But I find that a lot of negotiations end up being, asymmetrical and not a great use of time. And the best way to make the negotiation more productive for you is to get ahead of these issues. And so that's my advice on that point. I want to ask one closing question and then maybe answer a few more questions in the chat. And this was one where, as we were going through the prep call, we were like, it's a bit of a stumper. The differences between the roles that have surprised you. So there are differences that we sort of expected moving from paralegal to legal ops, but then there are some differences that maybe caught us off guard. And Caitlin in particular, you said, I'm going to need to think about that. So what do you say?
I still have to think about that. It's a tough one. I think because I am in that some days transition, some days, I'm distinct. It's just there is so much overlap. There's a lot of differences too, though. And so I guess what surprised me the most is just that when I got the opportunity to say, would you like to join legal operations? I think you'd be good at it. I, full transparency, had that, oh gosh, I can't do legal operations. Imposter syndrome kicked in. And then as I started to think about it, and I said, oh, wait a second. I have done that. I've been scrappy. I've created a litigation hold system on a SharePoint site. Okay, I could do this. So I guess my surprising thing is just that, get out of your comfort zone and take the risk and take the leap. And I think it'll be rewarding. So.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Caitlin. Allison, what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And I have to kind of go with what Caitlin's going with, because there's nothing really that has been totally surprising to me, except that I was able to do a lot more based on my skill set that I built than I thought I could. And so that, putting that faith in myself and realizing, wow, I really did have that skill. I can totally implement a system. And then going from there, I think I just sort of surprised myself. That was the most surprising thing. So I think you're right, Caitlin.
Greta?
It's crazy. As Allison was talking, I was thinking the exact same thing. You think about, I think a lot of times we think about the title and we don't realize that the experience is what really is important. And so I was really surprised that, even though it was a legal operations job, it could have been titled something else and my experience still fit for it. And so that's probably what was surprising to me.
I think this is a great thought to end on, and you've all sort of said it in slightly different ways. Caitlin, you said, looks like I sometimes have imposter syndrome, and I see in the comments a number of people are saying me too. So I said at the start of this webinar that I got the idea to pull together a panel like this and talk about this topic because of this post that I had made on LinkedIn. About 200 people, liked the post on LinkedIn. It was viewed by 40,000 people. And at the time, I looked back through all of the people that liked it. I opened up every single LinkedIn profile and I calculated what percentage of the people that liked this, that responded to it, that are in corporate legal department operations roles, what percentage of them started their careers as paralegals? And the answer was 57%. Right. And a lot of the people that reacted to this post were heads of legal operations at large, successful companies. So we all have days when we feel really good about ourselves. We all have days when we have imposter syndrome or feel terribly about ourselves. But the data doesn't lie, right? You can successfully move from being a paralegal to being a legal operations professional and have an extremely successful career doing so. So kick the imposter syndrome to the side, spend more time participating in organizations like Legal Operators, like Clock. Bright Flag recently launched a Legal Ops 101 program. It's 100% free. It's not about Bright Flag at all. You can go to brightflag.com and we've got 3 episodes up right now on accrual accounting, financial planning and analysis, SOX compliance. And the idea is to create, and Legal Operators does this as well, is to create content that will help people to be successful in legal operations roles. So I hope that this webinar was helpful. Greta, Allison, Caitlin, thank you so much for your time and for your insight. I mentioned to the panel right before we went live, being as how, we all work in legal operations, we are sticklers for time, and we want to give you a little bit back before your next meeting starts in 9.5 minutes, which we're sure it will. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn or by email. I'm sure all of the panelists would also love to hear from you as well. Hope you have a great rest of the day. And if you are in the southeast of the US, stay dry and stay safe. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Fabulous. Thank you, everyone. That was excellent. Thank you.
Like,
Thank you.